Okay, now, so let's move on to a cabling Cisco switch via console connection. So there are three ways we can use. So first way is old to old. So switches would have had, the old connections would have had an RJ45 console port. So it just looks like an Ethernet port. And those would connect to a PC's serial port, which would have had nine. They had You had 9 pins. So we used something called DB9 connector to connect into those ports. Now, today you don't really see them in PCs, but in PCs going back 15, 20 years ago, you would have seen this serial ports. So you'd need something called a rollover console cable. So they normally had like a sky blue color. Even the modern console cables still use that sky blue color. It's quite iconic now with console ports to see that. With the console cables, they generally, I don't know why, but they came in a sky blue color. But yeah, those you would have used a rollover console cable. Then technology changed in computers, of course, and we adopted USB, and so then you would need when we came into this point in history, we started using adapters, unless you had a cable which was RJ45 console on the one side and was USB on the other side. But otherwise, you may have used an adapter to convert the connection from your RJ45, from your original console cable, your rollover console cable, which had a DB9, which had a DB9 serial connector, to you would have had your original rollover cable with that DB9 serial connector, and you would have had a converter which converts the DB9 into USB, and so you put these together, and that's your old to new. But you need that adapter there in the middle to enable that connection. And now nowadays you're seeing you can buy easily from Amazon. You can buy a switch. For the new switches which have USB ports, you can buy a USB to USB cables, console USB to PC USB, and you can connect like that with the new switches that have USB console ports. Okay, if you're using like a 2960 Cisco Catalyst, then you're not going to see that, but with the new switches, you will have that. So let's move on now. Console access, right? So console access, by default, there's no password needed to access your switch if you have a console connection, because if you have a console connection to a switch, you are directly in front of it. You have physical access to it, so it kind of makes sense you don't really need a password because you're at the switch, you're not accessing remotely. So generally, if you're if you're directly with that switch, you're an authorized person in that building, in that room, to be able to access that switch. So it kind of makes sense, but many admins will still apply simple password protection. And if you want to do this, you can do this either when the user connects via console cable or when the user enters privileged exec mode. So this, you can do it either way like that. So let's talk about Cisco Switch CLI now. So that can be accessed via Telnet, SSH, and also just now we were talking console cables. So to access the CLI, if you're using SSH, Telnet, you need to configure a terminal emulator, right? So that terminal emulator enables you to access the Cisco switch. Okay, so Telnet, SSH, console cable. The switch CLI can be accessed by these three methods. For terminal emulator, you need this to be able to access your switch terminal. Now, on Windows, I would normally use PuTTY, and a lot of people use PuTTY. PuTTY is very commonly installed terminal emulator. You can install this for free. Go on Google, search for PuTTY, and you can install this for your computer. And if you're using Mac OS, you could install a terminal emulator. Terminal emulator from the web. You could do that, no problem. However, what I've found is, and in fact, learned this from Jeremy Chiara, one of his videos, is that there's a native terminal app that you can use to access the Cisco CLI. So Jeremy Chiara from CBT Nuggets, many of you probably know him. Jeremy Chiara has a pretty good video, which is very short and very brief, but it shows you how to access macOS using the native terminal app in macOS to access Cisco CLI. So that is a really good video. So you can do it without even installing any third-party app in Mac. And Windows, I'm not sure if you can do this or not, but PuTTY is what I normally see people do. So you've got those options for Mac, Windows, and Linux. Twice I've not really explored, but there'll definitely be a way of accessing via Linux as well if you're using a Linux operating system. The emulator needs to be configured to use the PC's serial port to match the switch's console port settings. And if you have a pen and paper or you have your computer with you, please take note of the following default console port settings. So these are the default settings that you need. Sorry, these are not console port settings. Sorry, default terminal emulator settings. These are the default terminal emulator settings that you need. So firstly, 9600 bits per second. No hardware flow control. 8-bit ASCII. I just call it ASCII. 8-bit ASCII. No parity bits. 1 stop bit. So 9600 bits per second, no hardware flow control, 8-bit ASCII, no parity bits, and 1 stop bit. So I'd advise you guys to definitely take note of all of these. Now, you might be wondering, well, what the heck is ASCII? What does that even mean? Well, ASCII, it stands for American Standard Code for Information Interchange. Now, basically, it's code that assigns numerical values to English letters, characters, and symbols. For example, the letter A uses 65. It has a numerical value of 65 assigned to it. And computers communicate and exchange data and code, and humans write commands. So it's so A, for example, is 65 in the numerical ASCII. Okay, that's the numerical value in ASCII for A. Now, standard ASCII uses 7 bits, right? But extended ASCII uses 8 bits, okay? And 8-bit is used for error checking. So 7-bit ASCII does not have that. 8-bit ASCII does. And in the terminal emulator, we want to specify 8-bit ASCII. So we want to specify 8-bit ASCII. So, this, right, can be a bit difficult to memorize, I think. It can be difficult. I've had trouble memorizing it. So what I've done is create a little analogy, and what this analogy is basically you have a gentleman called Mr. Terminal. He wins $9,600. Just stay with me. $9,600. He wins $9,600. He has hardly any financial control, and he spent 8 to 1 of that money away. Okay, now it's a very, very random story, but I'm telling you, if you look here, there's key parts of the story relate to the default terminal emulator settings that we want to memorize. So 9600 bits per second, that's where I got $9,600 from. No hardware flow control, HFC, and I've created another HFC acronym there, hardly any financial control. So no hardware flow control, hardly any financial control, HFC. 8-bit ASCII, so 8 bit is where I got 80 from, spending 80%. No means sharing with no one, so no parity bits, sharing with no one. No parity bits, sharing with no, and then 3 dots for suspense, 1 stop bit, 1. So Mr. Terminal wins $9,600, has hardly any financial control, spent 8 to 1 of it away, shares it with no one, winning $9,600, hardly any financial control, spending 80%, sharing with no one. Just a little analogy to help you guys hopefully memorize this. Okay, so when you look at this, think of that story. So hopefully when it comes to the exam and you're asked about the default terminals emulate sayings, you can think back to that story. Okay, right, okay, you had Mr. Terminal, you won $9,600. That means 9 bits per second. Okay, and he didn't have any control, hardly had any control, so no hardware flow control. 8-bit ASCII, he spent 80% of it. No parity bits, 1 stop bit, sharing with no one. So that story can help you, hopefully, to memorize that. So let's move on to Telnet and SSH, right? So these are 2 other ways of accessing our Cisco CLI. Now, Telnet, right, use the concept of a Telnet client and the Telnet server. The Telnet client is the terminal application, such as macOS terminal, that I was speaking about, and the Telnet server, which is normally the switch. So in this case, it's the switch. It could be a router if you're accessing a router, but in this case, it's the switch. So you're accessing a Telnet, you're using a Telnet client, so it could be your macOS terminal, could be PuTTY terminal, could be a different third-party terminal emulator. Okay, that is a way. So you got your Telnet client, you got your Telnet server. Telnet though has a fatal flaw in that it sends all data, I apologize for the typos there, including your username and password for login as clear text data. It's not a good idea at all. So SSH is a more secure alternative. SSH will encrypt the content of login details and messages, which prevents a man in the middle from capturing your session traffic. Let's move on to user enable mode now. Okay, so enable mode, also privileged exec mode. Now, excuse me guys, there's so many names here. There's different names, so please try and remember that these modes have different names. So the user mode is also called the exec mode. This is where you can basically look around, access basic monitoring commands, but you can't really do much here. And this, you're in there because the prompt, like for example here in New York City switch 1, NYC-SW1, has this at the end. That indicates basic your user mode or your exec mode. Then moving on to privileged exec mode or enable mode or privilege mode. This is a higher level of access where you can use the reload command if you want to reinitialize or reboot your switch. Okay, you can do more in here. You can access. You got a lot more privilege here, but this is password protected, and you're in it because you'll have a hash at the end of the switch prompt. So NYC-SW1 here indicates it indicates that you are now in privileged exec mode or exec mode or privileged exec mode, enable mode, or privileged mode. Different terms. Enable mode is called enable mode because you use the command enable. Use the enable exec command to get into this mode. We use the enable secret command from global configuration mode to configure the password to get into this mode. So when you tap in enable, you're challenged with that password and you enter successfully, you get into privileged exec mode. So user mode or enable mode commands are referred to as exec commands. Something important to remember. So those for that initial mode, user mode, enable mode, the commands for that mode is referred to as exec commands. So that basically brings me now to the end of the video. In part 2, we're going to cover accessing CLI via web UI, CLI help features, configuring Cisco switch iOS, and starting copying and erasing Cisco config files. So, and it's going to be another exciting video, and I'm looking forward to having you guys with me on the next video. So thank you so much for watching. Sorry I didn't cover everything in this video, so I'm breaking it down into 2 videos, but hopefully that's given you an introduction to Cisco CLI, and please join me in the next video and we'll look into it further. So thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate you watching. Please like, share, subscribe, it really helps me out. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you. Goodbye.